Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and I've made a little bonus episode today so that I can take some time to answer a recurring question I've been receiving for a long time now. Every so often, people have been sending me messages either through the YouTube comments section or the website or you know social media, Instagram, whatever, and they've been just asking me, "How are you doing since leaving the Hari Krishna movement?" Which is, I guess, a year and change ago now. It was last fall of two. It was fall of 2022, and we're here in. As I'm making this, I'm in February of 2024. So, uh, yeah, it's about a year and a half ago that I left the Bhakti yoga tradition that I had taken like monastic vows in and was a practitioner of, and I left that tradition, and I had been given the initiated name of acyuta-bhava in that tradition, which was a great honor, and I don't regret anything I learned or experienced from that stage of my life. Things have changed a lot for me in terms of what my spirituality, my practices look like, and occasionally, people on the channel ask me, "What are you doing now? What do your practices look like? How have they changed? How have your beliefs changed?" And so, occasionally, I like to do a little personal update and let people know, um, only because you guys ask consistently. And after a while, I feel like, yeah, an update might be appropriate. I want to tell you that these are all just, these are ideas and thoughts, not advice. Any of this, and it's just a reflection of where I'm at, what I've been doing. If any of it is useful to you, great. And if not, no big deal. I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. So since leaving the world of Bhakti yoga and the Hari Krishna tradition, which is very diverse, there's many different um, uh, groups and sections and subsections, and they are reflective of a tradition of Vaishnavism in India that is very old and very diverse. And I was certainly aligned with what I consider to be a very liberal, progressive, open-minded group of people. And I didn't leave because of any hatred or anything dark that was happening. It just wasn't a good fit. And you'll find that people have had a lot of things to say about various yogic groups and sects over the years. And certainly, like, I'm not here to be standing in judgment of any of those traditions. Only I can only report on my own experiences, right? But anyway, a lot has changed for me since leaving that tradition, which I learned a lot from a couple of trips to India and pilgrimage. Uh, you know, Years of daily japa, 2 to 3 hours a day uh, of mantra meditation. Oh gosh, I learned a lot. I've read, thousands of pages of sacred literature from the Vaishnav tradition. I mean, that was a full on immersion into a religious experience, a religious tradition. Ultimately, it wasn't the right one for me. And so you guys have shown an interest in my journey. I've shared quite a few elements of my experiences. And so I've done so because I think a part of the style of my programming is to emphasize personal storytelling as a vehicle for understanding archetypes and sharing the adventure of astrology together in a way that is inclusive of what I'm learning and experiencing as a person. That's always been my mode. People, some people like that, some people are, it's not their thing, and thankfully there's, I think, enough interesting channels of content out there that if it's not your style, you can find someone who is. um, so I'm going to talk today very basically the two ways that the questions have been phrased that I've gotten, usually at least a couple a month. So they stack up, maybe 50, 60 over the past year have emailed or text or whatever, DM'd to ask this. And they've said, well, how have your beliefs changed? Have your beliefs shifted in any substantial way? I'm curious to know, if so, how those beliefs have shifted or changed. And then also, how have your practices changed? So fair enough. I'll tell you. And, you know, again, not trying to convince you of anything. You don't have to do any of this stuff. This is just where I'm at. So how have my beliefs changed? There are several ways in which they have changed. The number one way that I would say that my beliefs have changed is that I see the body and the material world itself as sacred and not to be transcended or escaped through spirituality. Now, believe me when I say that there are so many diverse religious and spiritual groups and philosophies about the world and about its existence and whether we should think of it as sacred or think of it as an illusion or something to be transcended. My the experience that I found as a kind of undercurrent that didn't work for me over years of participation, and not just in this yogic tradition that I took vows in, but in the broader pantheon of Eastern philosophical traditions and even Western esoteric traditions, is that the idea was that we are here to get off the cycle of death and rebirth by transcending the process and being liberated to some kind of spiritual paradise or a spiritual form of release or enlightenment. Now, obviously, I have to preface all of this by saying I have no idea. I don't know anything, right? I don't know. Maybe that is the goal. Maybe that is what we're all aiming toward, or we should be aiming toward, or something like that. But what I found in the sort of yogic tradition in general is that there's a pretty strong emphasis on the idea that we are meant to, at some point, never be born again and to transcend the material world. And whether we are or aren't in the grand picture, I found that my psyche is not aligned with that idea in this life, in the life that I'm living right now. And it may be that in some future life, if that is indeed the soul's prerogative, that I guess I'll take to it then. At some point, if that's the real deal, then I trust that I'll figure it out. But yeah, the main thing was just this recognition that I had that I'm a material being in a material world, and that I believe that this world is sacred, and thinking about transcending the world and leaving, or thinking about ultimate goals of liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth it's not where I'm at. It's not what I value. And it's not also that people who believe such things need to be wrong to me for me to have the view that I have. Because I think underlying my personality is a pretty strong sense of like, I don't fucking know. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't, although this became very apparent to me that the body and world is sacred, that it was not coming at the cost of thinking that everyone else was wrong in the tradition that I was a part of. It was just a very simple recognition that this isn't a good fit for me, because I feel that this world is sacred, that I'm here for reasons that are meant to be experienced, and that being fixated on transcendence is not aligned for me. And I found that it was very difficult to participate in the tradition that I was a part of without constantly feeling inundated by currents of transcendence, right? That there was just such an emphasis on transcendence, and it just wasn't a match for me. That's not to say that I don't think that there isn't a role, like transcendence and immanence philosophically to me are like a dyad, and they both play a really important role in my life philosophically. It's not that I don't think transcendence exists or that it plays a role in life, or that spirituality and transcending various vices or shadows isn't a part of spirituality. It's just that the tradition that I was a part of was too fixated for me personally on the idea that this world is ignorant or an illusion or something to be transcended. And to be fair, there are teachers within the tradition that I was a part of that were, I think, a lot more hospitable and positive and optimistic about the existence of the material world than others. It wasn't like a black and white thing. Anyway, so that's one belief that's really changed. Is I've really, my whole life, in fact, growing up a preacher's kid and experimenting with various traditions, from the shamanic entheogenic traditions, like the ayahuasca-based traditions that I was a part of for a long time, to the yogic world that I was a part of. What I really found for me in making this shift was that a lot of my life has been focused on the movement upward, right? Whether that's mentally or intellectually or spiritually, just the transcendent perspective was sort of overly developed. And I started to recognize that it was at the cost of my love and connection with the bodily, the material, the earthly. You could even call it the feminine or the immanent, the yin. And so that was it. That was the major belief that shifted for me, just kind of simply. So anyway, I would say another way in which my beliefs have changed is in terms of what I would call devotion without certainty. So one of the things I love about Bhakti Yoga that I will always love, we still have Krishna Radha on our altar, by the way. And so I absolutely adore the Bhakti Yoga tradition. I think it is so beautiful, but some of the doctrines and dogmas and the intense level of commitment and sort of card carrying membership, it wasn't for me, and mostly because of the first belief shifting that I just outlined. But if I had to describe what has shifted for me, devotion to God or the divine, in and through astrology or anything in my life, has shifted to being somewhat doctrineless and dogmaless, which means that I believe that devotional love and connection to the divine is still an everyday part of my life. It is still the focus of my life, you could say, especially through my work with astrology. But it no longer feels like it needs to be rooted in any particular like doctrinal or dogmas, doctrinal certainties or dogmatic certainties. Core principles are very few for me. And I think that's probably because there's a sense of love that is there in me for the divine, but recognizing that there is a propensity within my mind, maybe it's Mars and Gemini in my chart, to get more fixated on, what can prop up my beliefs intellectually or ideologically. And what this transformation was about for me, in a way, was about taking away underlying ideological, intellectual, or doctrinal certainties that were sort of like buttressing my faith path, and realizing that they may be there or not, all these different teachings and doctrines and texts and so forth, but I don't. I really am much better. I'm much better off when my focus on loving the divine is coming from the heart and not so much relying on the head. That's all I can say. It's just like, oh, how have I changed? How have my beliefs changed? I still have a tremendous amount of devotion for God or the divine, whatever word works, but there's far less emphasis on there being intellectual certainty about how everything works, right? And that was a huge step for me. I mean, for people listening, these things may be very basic to you because, you're more enlightened, or you're whatever. You've run into these lessons already. For me, to turn up the devotion and turn down the intellect was a big part of my step away from this tradition. Number 3, the major belief that's changed is that I see love and relationships as the purpose of life, which is in fact a very Bhakti Yoga kind of teaching. But I see that as something that, if it is not working in and through the world, regardless of religious affiliation, that it doesn't really work for me. So in other words, I think the way in which my beliefs have shifted is to emphasize human relationships in my life, personal human relationships, tenderness, devotion, care, especially the role that I'm in right now in life, right? A dad and a husband, someone who owns a company with staff, a teacher, an astrologer with clients. These are the roles that I'm here to work into and learn love through. And I see those as sacred and not as something that is a vehicle to some kind of transcendent goal, but is just something right here in front of me that is calling for me to focus on. And that is an emphasis that has really changed for me from a place that was much more focused on discipline, transcendence, and a kind of intellectual buttressing of certainties. That's all changed. And I'd like to think that as we age, a lot of these change for a lot of people, who have a religious inclination, that we all kind of learn these things as we go along, right? And that you can learn them and still be part of a faith tradition, by the way. There's no problem with that. It's the fact that I had to leave one doesn't mean that there's no good in them, right? Anyway, number 4, astrology is enough. I'll never forget, I was talking with my therapist and telling him how hesitant I felt to think of astrology, because it's my day job, to think of it as my spiritual practice at the same time. Like, I was really, they felt like polarized, like this can't be both your day job and your spirituality. But that's also an idea that's really changed for me, where now I see the daily tracking of the stars, the teaching, reflecting, preparing of talks, seeing clients, and living an astrological life as a, a tradition enough, or as structure enough, or as participation enough, whatever you want to call it. There's probably, again, because I grew up a preacher's kid, there's some part of me that thinks you have to have some kind of mode or structure or practice or discipline, or you have to have some affiliation or some like articles of faith, so to speak, that organize or focus your path. And it's funny, because astrology, really, that's the only thing in my life resembling that any longer. And there was a little bit of time initially where I thought that there was something wrong with that. And now what I'm realizing is that no, the astrology is such a beautiful tradition. And one of the most amazing things about the tradition is that it has grafted itself onto so many different religious traditions around the world over thousands of years. It's very flexible in that respect, and can also stand alone. It doesn't have to be grafted onto something else. It's enough. It's enough to speak with and mingle our minds with the gods every day, and our hearts, and to learn and relate to the universe with a language and a practice that helps us to see and relate to divinity. And like, what more do we need? Now, you could have more. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but for me, there was a fear or some kind of shame or sense of guilt that there isn't something more in addition to astrology. And so that's really shifted for me. So these are the growth points, I guess. These are how my beliefs have changed. But the thing is that these aren't static statements. These are just kind of like, this is how things have changed, how things have shifted. And, I would equally resist any of these statements I've just made turning into like hardened perspectives that alienate me from the life I'm here to live. Do you know what I mean? So I think, uh, it's just, yeah. And I also reserve the right, as I'm sure all of you would, if you were doing a talk like this, right? You reserve the right to keep growing and changing, to evolve, and to open your mind to new perspectives. Um, the relationship between transcendence and immanence, in my humble opinion, seeing so many clients and thinking about it in my own life, is something that it just continues to be a dialogue that goes back and forth. How to be here in the world and not bypass it with spirituality, but also how to not get stuck, and how to make sure that we are taking trips up to the top of the mountain to worship, at the top of the mountain, as opposed to only staying, stuck in the valley of life, so to speak. So there's a back and forth. And for me, again, I'd say the biggest thing that happened was I realized, oh, you know what? I'm a little fixated on the mountain, and I'm not as good at knowing how to be in or appreciate the divinity of the world, of my body especially. That was a huge part of this. Anyway, okay, so what practices have changed? And I hope any of this is interesting for you guys. And I honestly, I wouldn't just be like, well, let me just tell you all about this, if I hadn't received so many thoughtful and nice questions over the past year. So anyway, practices that have changed. Number 1, very simple. I've cut back on meditation. That's been really, really important for me, because although I love meditation and prayer, all different practices I've had over so many years of prayer, contemplation, meditation, listening, silence, so many different forms. There's less of that now, significantly less, which is not to say that I devalue it or that it's not important. In fact, I would say that there are different forms of meditation that just look less like formal meditation, right? Like sitting and breathing and closing your eyes and counting beads or what have you. So there's a lot less of that. And for me, that has been because there's been a significant shift to finding those flow states of open communion with the divine, where there's conversation, dialogue, insight, and sometimes also almost like a shutting off the mind and entering into a flow. I have found those things in much more physical manifestations that have been really important to me because, again, one of the core things that really shifted for me was the importance on becoming a little bit more embodied and validating and getting into the material energy, so to speak. So anyway, there's less like formal looking meditation. There's more physical activity and emphasis on health. So, for example, whereas I used to spend almost 2 to 3 hours a day in japa meditation, maybe more like 30 minutes of something prayerful or contemplative. Whereas now I have maybe about 2 hours that I spend 5 days a week at the gym. And at the gym, by the way, I've got my headphones on with music that for me is very conducive to entering. I have like a lot, I would say electronic music has been really nice for me. It's a place of getting into a flow. And by the way, when you're lifting weights, for people out there who lift weights, one of the things that's very interesting about lifting weights is that it works the best when there is a very conscious, slow movement where you're making a mind muscle connection and you're breathing. And that slow contraction, that slow contracting of the muscle, it's not just going really fast, trying to pump iron, but you're going very slow, very mindfully. On the like, so let's say you're doing a pulling exercise, you pull down and then you slowly come back up, and you're really trying to feel your muscle and focus in that way. And along with the music, for me, that has been so therapeutic, you guys. I know it might sound like if you just think about someone in gym apparel or whatever, it might sound like it's very meaty or meatheady or something like that, But for me, it has been about getting into my body and recognizing that God is in my body, that my body is a sacred temple, and that, gosh, I was really not looking at it that way. I mean, it's not that I was like trashing my body, that I was so unhealthy, but I never just thought, I never really deepened into a relationship with it. And so, in many ways, just putting my headphones on, going to the local gym, I tend to go in the afternoons when it's pretty dead because I like it, I like a little bit of privacy, and just getting into my own world and focusing on that mind muscle connection. It's been very, very powerful. And then, obviously, like, I'll do that and then I'll do some cardio. And on the cardio, it's the same thing. I'm just working the breath and trying to become either in a flow state or in a kind of mindless, quiet emptiness. And I know that, like, there's a part of me, there's a voice in me that's like, that's not enough. That's not spiritual. Well, the real revolution in my life has been bullshit. It is. It's if you have the right mindset and you're entering into that space, not out of vanity, but because of your desire to feel good, to be healthy, and to connect with your body, to have it's like a monk who takes care in making sure that the ashram is beautiful. And by beautiful, I mean like clean and welcoming and so forth. Like, to me, what's really been revolutionary has been the idea that there's an intimate connection between my mind, my mood, my heart, my ability to care for and connect with my work, with the people I serve, my family, and taking this kind of care of my body. It's been revolutionary for me. So I've had a lot more emphasis on working out, weights, resistance training, and cardio. And at the gym that I go to, they have like in the men's locker room, they have a sauna. So I'll often sit in the sauna for 10, 15 minutes after I work out too, and just sweat. And in there, I'll sometimes just sit and meditate. But anyway, that's been a huge shift to me. It's almost as though the mode of ashram has shifted to something significantly more physical, but to me, no different really in terms of the quality of connection that I feel like I have to spirit. So it's pretty amazing that's been for me the revolution. It's been happening as Uranus has also squared my ascendant ruler Venus, which I think is pretty profound in terms of the shift to physical health that the ascendant ruler will often entail, in the revolution of Uranus in my first house. So people have probably noticed that, like, that I placed more emphasis on my physical health in the past year. I've gone through quite a physical transformation in terms of putting on weight and size at the gym and stuff like that. But I mean, to me, that's not been the goal. It's just what happened along the way as I got healthier and took more proactive interest in my health. But there's so many things that go along with that. Like, for example, I started seeing a coach who writes the program. So I take the program that he writes for me to the gym, and then he writes my nutrition program too. So a huge shift for me has been about nutrition. You know, cooking all of my own food and using all like single ingredient whole food types of choices in my diet. You know, learning that it's a good thing to feel and be hungry at different times during the day, learning to eat, more rhythmically, less sporadically and emotionally, which were, I'm a Cancer. So like, that's easy. It's Taurus rising with a Cancer sun. It's easy for me to eat emotionally and rather impulsively. Drinking enough water, getting enough sleep, and going for walks, like regularly, just being more active. These like all of that got turned up. I mean, you're looking at someone who like for a long time was like rather sedentary, reading shitloads of books and just like meditating. You know what I mean? So these are radical changes in my life that have made me a much happier, healthier person, and no less spiritual in my mind in terms of what I've learned and what they've been inspiring within me. I don't have any, I'm not a fitness guru. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that what I think most people don't understand, that I certainly didn't, about looking and feeling your best on a physical health level, and is that you really need the combination of diet, eating the right amount and the highest quality food that's like healthy. And most people don't experience real changes until their diet, because the diet is almost more important than the workouts. And then obviously like working out with some balance of like, resistance training and cardio. I think, there's so many different ways to work out, whatever, but that's what I've done. And then, uh, hydration, and like not, making sure you recover, that you get like lots of rest, and that you try to increase the level of activity. It's amazing to me that like there's a way in which, there's lots of people who are super healthy for very different reasons, but and they may look good, but they're also maybe not healthy or whatever. So I'm not trying to be a fitness guru or anything, but I would say the only advice I have for people is that it takes more than just going to work out, or it takes more than just sweating. It's like a marriage of like rest, recovery, hydration, eating right, and exercising semi regularly, and making sure that that's going. To me, what's amazing is that my background in monastic practices, like 3 hours of meditation a day, have translated very naturally into me learning self-care habits that are much more physical, that are much more like embodied, and that put me into touch with digestion cycles and glucose levels. And like, you can start to feel and notice all of these things. It's pretty, but it's like, it still requires a kind of devotion, attending, a caring for. It's like a garden. You have to take care of it or it won't do so well. So anyway, there's been a lot more emphasis on that, which is new in my life and the entirety of my life. Like, this is something that I never really knew how to do or whatever. And then finally, more creative activities. So there's still meditation and contemplative practice. There's much more emphasis on physical rhythms and health, and a lot of, like things like diet and all that. And then the third is more creative activity. So one of the things that I recognize is that there's also this part of me that always believed for many years that creative writing, or playing my guitar, or making art, or writing in my journal were not as valuable as meditation or prayer. I'm sorry to even admit that. It's embarrassing. I feel like it was surprising. Honestly, the thing is that it was surprising to me to figure out that I actually thought these things, because they were pretty unconscious, Now I'm writing my first book since I wrote, I'm writing my second book since I wrote my first one, which was published 14 years ago. So creative writing, and the kind of slow dissemination of a new book, playing my guitar, taking guitar lessons, writing in my journal, um, playing with my kids more, playing board games with my kids, especially. That's been really fun. Been kind of like getting into board games from my childhood. It's all random stuff, but the point is that I have been realizing that having fun and being creative is is so valuable spiritually. As and it if all I have to do is think to myself, this is not wasted time where you could be praying or reading a book, amplifying your intellectual knowledge, or you know leveling up somehow spiritually through meditation. No, again, life is about love and relationships, which means that creative activity is a hugely important spiritual practice, you might say. You could call it that. So, anyway, these are the things that I've learned: less meditation, more physical activity, emphasis on health, more creative activity. Those are that's what I do now, often, and some combination of those things is fueling the way that I prepare my content every day in the same way that meditation used to. But these are the things that are now really like I have, and I'm still the kind of person where I need like daily practices of devotion, because that's just how I am. I'm very ritualistic. I'm very devotional. I like rhythms where I get to so like playing my guitar now, taking care of my health, meditating in the sauna for 15 minutes. These are very new for me. And so much of it is wed to creativity in the world and the sanctity of my body and physical reality in the world. So anyway, I hope that this, again, like, is any of this advice for any of you? No, not unless you feel like it could be. I don't, it's not like I'm just updating you guys because you guys asked, and I so appreciate your interest in my spiritual journey. It's nice to share something of it as I go, and I reserve the right to keep learning and growing along with everyone else. All right, that's it. I hope that you're having a good day, and leave some comments. Tell me how you've grown and what kinds of ways you've been shifting in your spirituality or your humanity over the past couple of years. I'd love to hear your stories as well. All right, that's it for now. Take it easy. Bye.